Welcome to the Grief and Belief podcast, where we share stories of hope. Thank you for joining us. We hope this powerful story will help you feel God's love for you today.
Welcome to another episode of the Grief and Belief podcast. I'm David Mickelson.
I'm Kori Andrews.
And Kori, I think we have something that we are both super excited about. And I'm wondering if you can just kind of introduce the idea and introduce Jordan again to our listeners.
Yeah, this is so fun. This is the first time that we've had the opportunity to have somebody back, a guest back on the podcast, but this time in a little bit different capacity. Last time Jordan shared about her incredible husband, Jake, and his experiences or her experience with grief when he passed away. And was such a powerful episode, and we learned so much from her that we needed more. We didn't get enough in that one episode. And Jordan really has so much to offer that we feel like our audience could really benefit from. Just so you know why, it's part of the reason why we're asking her to come back on is because she is currently a PhD candidate at BYU for counseling and therapy. And so we're grateful for her being willing to come and share some of those ideas and things that she's learned through her, not only her education, but also her experience as a counselor with over 1,500 of clinical hours of therapy. And so I just think she brings so much to the table. Also, in addition to that, she has just this experience of leading groups with adults and youth and children. And also she's an expert on bereavement literature for children. And we might have one of those. We might have an episode on that for some great children's books that could be a resource to you. So we just feel like, Jordan, you bring so much to the table, and we're so grateful for you willing to come back on and share some of your knowledge and your experience with our audience, and believe it's going to be really helpful. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you both. I just look forward to it. It's like I've given my life over to learning about what's available to help people who are grieving. And so I feel really grateful to have a place to share some of that more broadly.
For our listeners, I think it would be really helpful if you were to give us some feedback on how these episodes go. We anticipate releasing one a month on the first Tuesday of the month. And as you listen to them, if you could just share with us what you're learning and how it's applying to you and how it makes you feel, and kind of give us the feedback to say, this is something we should continue to do. We have a number of episodes that we've kind of planned around this idea of bereavement counseling and ideas and frameworks and different topics. But we want it to be helpful to you. And so let us know in the comments on, any of the platforms, and let us know or on social media, of course. We check those really well and want to make sure that we're providing something that would be of value to everyone. I think Kori and I are excited because it feels like we're about to get some free counseling.
That's right.
I don't know if it's that. We can't legally sign off.
No.
I'm going to nerd out and tell you all the stuff.
Yeah.
Do you take tacos? Can we pay you in tacos? No.
Sí, por favor.
Yeah, there you go. No, yeah, grateful. And maybe you could start off. I know I kind of gave a little bit of background, but tell them about your experience, and maybe even if there's someone out there who's like, how do I kind of follow in Jordan's footsteps? I'd love to help in some way. I think once you join the grief community, you empathize in a different way than you did before, and you want to look for ways to help. Could you maybe share some ideas on how people can help and how, and kind of your journey to getting to the point where you're at?
Yeah, for sure. For me, it started, my husband was in hospice and we're going to different end of life things. I told him out loud, once we're done with this, I'm never touching it again. And then it's like been this huge turnaround. And so it started kind of in listening and learning just about loss and bereavement. That for me was like the intellectual out of like, what is happening to me? I need to understand this. Pointed me to some really wonderful books on like end of life care, which then opened the door to volunteering with hospice. And so here I said, I'm never going into this again. And then I'm a couple of years later back at it. But I think volunteering is a wonderful way to start. If you've had a bereavement experience and you feel like, I want to help people who are grieving, the best way to just dip your toes in without a huge commitment is to become a volunteer. And there's several options for that. Most communities have hospice organizations, and you can sign up and with a background check in a week, become a hospice volunteer. And there's different ways that looks like. That can be giving respite care, as someone is actively dying. That can be being part of bereavement groups, or sending out, like mailers or holiday things to different people through that hospice organization who are bereaved. So that's a good way to do it. There's also some just local community organizations. If you're in Utah, there's a wonderful, wonderful organization. Oh my gosh, I just forgot the name. It's going to come to me. But
the Healing Place. Was it the Healing Place?
What is it? It's the Healing Place. Yeah. And so they started officially in Salt Lake, but they now have 4 locations all through Utah, one in Utah County and one in St. George. And that's a place where they're actually looking for lay people to come and join in grief therapy groups. They do grief therapy for families. That's adults. They can have adolescents, children. They kind of break those up. And they love just people who've had a grief experience themselves to come and participate, give hope, give perspective to people who are newly bereaved. So I think that's what I would suggest initially. If you're feeling like, man, I want to help people in this situation, I want to be part of it, volunteer. And if your volunteering leads you to want more, then yeah, there's a lot of cool paths. There's definitely education. So you can get a degree in counseling. That could be social work, marriage, family therapy, PhD. So there are different routes there. You can also become a coach. There are bereavement and grief coaches. You can go through different certification processes for that. And then there's just specific certification programs on becoming familiar with death and dying. So one is called Thanatology. There's like a national organization. You can get trainings online and take some tests to say, yeah, I'm certified to work with people who are dying or who have been bereaved after they've lost someone who has died. So there's kind of lots of different routes, but I'd say the first step is just dip your toe in some way.
I really like that. And I feel like as I've talked with a number of people, it does become a natural pathway for those who have gone through a bereavement experience. They want to give back. They want to help. It feels rewarding and meaningful to help someone else. And so I've seen people do various of those different things. And I bet there's some listeners who will say, you know what, I'm going to contact a hospice company or the local hospital to see how I can get involved. And I would imagine there will be some lives changed because of a little bit of motivation from listening to that, which is really exciting. So anything else you would share on that topic, Jordan?
Yeah. I mean, and then I think I also want to tend to people who are like, I don't want to do this, right? Like this has been enough for me to live it and I'm done. I think honor that feeling too. Like it's not for everyone to dive in and say, I want to live in the grief world permanently, because sometimes your own experience there was enough. But find then the other ways in which you can offer what you have learned to the world. And those are innumerable. So I'd kind of touch on both of those aspects.
Yeah. And I love that, for those who are listening, who are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we have this really impactful concept of ministering. And there's just endless opportunities to minister, whether you're a member of this church or not a member of any church, or a believer in God. The idea of ministering to the needs of other people, there's just needs all around us. And so I think that's a great point. Well, today Jordan's going to take us through some various grief frameworks. And I think, one in particular will sound very familiar to everybody, and many will not be familiar at all. And I know, just as Jordan's kind of gone through with us, kind of opening my mind to some of these ideas, it really, like, a lot of it really resonated with me, that maybe I was missing out on some ways to think about my grief experience. And I just, even not going in super detail, just at a surface level, it was really helpful. And so we're really excited to do that. Before we do that, Jordan, I just wondered, sometimes when you're a strong believer in Jesus Christ, and the power that he can have to heal hearts and to heal lives and to provide that spiritual healing to us, a person might feel like grief counseling is not necessary or helpful to them. And for some, certainly it might not be. But why would a person benefit, maybe a believer in Jesus Christ, benefit from some counseling frameworks or some counseling experience?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a wonderful question, and something I think I grappled with myself, because we have such beautiful doctrine in the plan of salvation, and that we do know where these loved ones have gone. We do have complete hope in a reunion with them. We know that these are realities that we will experience. But I think the disconnect sometimes comes in the fact that knowing that is a reality doesn't always line up with what is your reality, meaning your life for the next 50 years, or 80 years if you lost your parent when you were a child. And so I think knowing about the grief experience and theories around grief and counseling around grief is what helps us navigate the now, because we can know these eternal, ultimate ideas and concepts, but we're still struggling in what is now, what isn't, what hurts, what is missing, what's painful. And so I think pursuing counseling just helps you navigate that in between stage. And whether that's pursuing, like, I'm going to counseling to work through my grief, or whether that's just understanding some of the frameworks around loss, around bereavement, because it's a human experience. Bereavement is not unique to people of faith. And so there are people, because I think that's another thing I hear often is like, how could you do this if you don't have faith? Well, millions of people do and have to, and have found ways through. So is there learning from people who don't have faith that can help people of faith also navigate this really lived, visceral experience of grief?
I'm just thinking of a quote while you were saying that, and it almost aligns perfectly. And with the recent passing of Elder Holland, which still feels very fresh in my mind and heart, this is kind of fitting that it's from him. But I loved his talk, "Like a Broken Vessel," from 2013. And he said it this way. There's actually a couple spots here I'd love to read. He said, "If you had an appendicitis, God would expect you to seek a priesthood blessing and get the best medical care available. So too with emotional disorders. Our Father in heaven expects us to use all of the marvelous gifts he has provided in this glorious dispensation." And I feel like there are, right? Like there are resources, there are frameworks, there are principles that are outside of, only in the scriptures that can be helpful, and that we should utilize. And I could be remembering wrong, but I remember talking to somebody, and this may have been you, Jordan, but that they were saying that there was a form of grief that was going to be categorized or could be categorized soon, related to grief. Is that ringing a bell?
Yeah. So the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Conditions, recently in their newest edition came out with a disorder. It's called prolonged grief disorder.
Yeah.
A little bit confrontational in that some people hate it, some people really wanted it there, but the idea is that, like, yes, we can become disordered in our mental health if our grief is prolonged, and there's some really specific specifiers of what you're looking for. So I don't want anyone to be like, I have that.
Yeah,
No.
right.
But like that this can become a thing that makes our life distressing in ways that make us unable to function.
Yeah, no,
Oh,
that's helpful to know. And then if I'll just share one more quote from that talk that I think is super helpful and fits with what you were saying, was he said, some have sought relief through medical or professional means, including medication, and have been blessed tremendously. Such help should not be viewed as a lack of faith. No one should ever feel that because they have prayed, exercised faith, or received priesthood blessings, that they should not also seek medical or professional help. We are not expected to face illness, physical or emotional, alone or unaided. And so, thank you for being a resource, right, for us and for our audience, of some aid, right, that
Yeah.
we can learn from and that we can draw from.
Well, and I'll say for my part, that's how I got through. It's like the revelation to Oliver Cowdery, that God will reveal it into your mind and your heart, right? We need the spiritual aspects, but we also need some of these really constructive mental health resources. And I had counseling. I had counseling for the 2 years of my husband's illness, and then for a year and a half after he died. And that combined with, all the faith resources and things, is what helped me to get through it. And so I think that's where I started. I started as the client, and now it's come full circle to where I can be someone to offer that help to other people.
That's awesome. Well, without further ado, I'm going to put some slides up on the screen. And so for those watching on YouTube, you'll see this really easily. For those who are listening, Jordan will, be able to describe everything in a way that you'll be able to understand without seeing the slides. We'll also make the slides available in episode notes. And so if you want to go back and pull them and study them separately, you'll have access to those as well. So Jordan, why don't you take us away?
Yeah, so there are actually lots of theories on grief. What is it? What is it like? What's normal? What do you experience? And how do you get through it? And so I've found kind of the top, there's many, but the most well-known, the most applicable 8 that I have used in research, that I've seen in academic articles, that I've heard at conferences. I try and attend any class on grief or death or loss in any conference I go to. So these are the ones that are most out there, widely known and used, that I thought we could just start there with an overview. I think as we do this, one idea is to see, do these map on for me, right? As I'm hearing this, as I'm seeing these images, is this apply? And know that there's so many, if one doesn't, that's okay, because maybe another one does. And so being open to that. And then I think using these as like, does this map onto me? Or does this help explain what I'm seeing in my child, in my spouse, in a loved one? Because the way we grieve is really unique. And so each theory, I think that's why it's a blessing there's many, because then there's more applicability and generality to more people.
Yeah, I love that. And we've talked so often about spouses grieving differently, that this really resonates, that not all of these will apply because we're just not experiencing the same thing, the same loss.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've ordered them, just my best way to order them was just like oldest to newest.
Okay. Okay.
So
Well,
let's
pull up the first one.
Yeah. So if you haven't heard of this one, I don't know where you've been, because when you think of grief and what you're supposed to do, Kubler-Ross, 1969, she wrote a book called On Death and Dying, The 5 Stages. This one is the most well-known. It's in any book you read, any explanation of grief, anything you see about it. Some interesting things, it hasn't been proven out in research. So it's not been shown to actually be what is happening to people. It was initially developed after Kubler-Ross interviewed people who were dying. So she interviewed 200 people who were themselves dying. And this process explained what they were feeling. But it's since been used so commonly to explain what the people left behind are feeling. So that's an interesting idea.
Which logically almost makes a little more sense, when you look at the stage. That's interesting. Okay. Yeah, keep going.
And then over time, as they've revisited it, the caveat has been, it used to be these were very linear stages. This is what happened. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You move through, you check the box. When you're done, you're done. And then more recent research has said These are cycles. So that's the graph I've included. The grief cycle, meaning you can move through and back and forward, and it will be a process that is not linear. You don't check boxes. So the main 5 ideas these are some maybe headers of what you'll experience as you're grieving: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And then each of those have kind of specific parameters. I think this theory became so widely adopted because it simplified this thing that was unexplainable. And when we can have a heuristic, something to make simple and explainable, something that's actually overwhelming, we lean into those. And so I think that's a wonderful thing that it offers. It just explains, here's some 5 feelings that you might have as you grieve.
Is there like a concern with this? You said it hasn't been proven out. So
Yeah.
what's
Like
what's
empirically,
maybe
if they do tests on people who are bereaved, this isn't shown to be how they experience grief. These 5 feelings in this order.
Okay.
And with it being so well known, yeah, maybe if I'm not experiencing these things in this order, then I'm doing it wrong.
And that's the problem. Because it's so well known and because it's been taught in this way, then people really have this sense of like, oh my gosh, not only am I grieving, I'm grieving wrong.
Oh,
Yeah.
I feel like that's so helpful to understand and to realize that and that there's data kind of backing that up, that maybe it isn't always like this,
Yeah. But Kubler-Ross's greatest contribution is just opening up a conversation about grief. Whereas before this is 1970, it came out, it was like, it's the thing we don't even really talk about. And so that's a big opening, kind of from the 70s on. This is a thing we can say. This is a thing we can verbalize out loud. So I think that's a benefit to where it started.
That's cool.
Okay. Love that. You want to go on to the next one?
Sure. Okay, so then next in the 80s comes William Worden, and he is a guy who is a therapist. So he is writing and doing therapy, and he writes a book for clinicians, but it's about grief. And it's about how to help them guide people who are grieving through their experience. And his idea is that rather than having grief just be this feeling thing, it's like this thing that is inside of you and it's emotional. He made it more concrete in saying it is an emotional thing, but the working through requires action. And so he developed what are called these 4 tasks of mourning. And the way they're laid out on this graphic is nice in that the idea is like, these are not ordered tasks, but these are just things that move within and around each other. So the 4 tasks are like, as you're having the emotions of grief, these are the 4 things that you're working on, that you can kind of devote time, energy to. The first is to accept the reality of the loss. The second is to process the feelings associated with the loss. Another is to remember the loved one and incorporate them moving forward. And then the final one is to adjust to the world without the loved one. And so the idea of these tests is just that instead of grief just being this thing I have to feel and that has to move around through me, it makes it more concrete. And there's now some things that I can do. And so that added on in the 80s. Now we can talk about it, we can say it, and then it was like, and here's some things we can start doing about it.
I feel like, sorry, David, I feel like recently we talked to someone about the idea of being acted upon and or being agents to act. And Elder Bednar's kind of talked a lot about that idea. And so I like this one because grief isn't just something that happens to us. We're not victims, but this is how we move to survivors a little bit by doing some action, by acting in some ways in faith, right? That we can move through.
Yeah, I love that.
And I feel like it puts me more in a position of power when there's a task I can accomplish. Same thing as what you're saying, Kori, but I just feel like I benefit from having an idea that I can act on or an assignment given to me that I can go do and sink my teeth into. I'm not great with theory and with emotion. Like I feel some emotion, but I want to do something, and
Mhm.
that's helpful for me. And I don't think the Kubler-Ross that we just talked about, it's harder for me to figure out what can I do. It's just like this is what I'll feel. I don't know what to do with those feelings, but
Yeah.
this makes it a little bit easier to say, okay, I could come up with some things I could do.
Yeah, yeah, and under each parameter, you could write down, list, uh, brainstorm of things like what would
Mm.
help me remember the loved one and incorporate them moving forward. Can we talk about that as a family? Can we talk about that as a couple?
Yeah.
Can we make plans around that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
so just another theory.
Super
Perfect.
helpful.
Okay. Our next one.
Yes, so Bowlby and Parks created what's called an attachment-based bereavement model, and Bowlby is used a ton now. This is like he's way current and in attachment. So attachment is like a keyword in psychology of we're really learning that like, oh, people need a secure person to attach to, and if that doesn't happen, especially for a child as they're growing up, there's a lot of difficulties related to it. And so it's interesting, their theories around the bereavement stuff is older in the 70s and 80s, but then the attachment stuff of today is more looking at our attachment needs relationally, especially as we're moving into a culture of isolation and loneliness. So theirs has two kind of aspects. They have phases that they describe you going through. The idea is that your attachment person, you've lost the attachment to the person who's died, right? You can't be attached in the same way to a deceased person as you can to someone who's alive. And so they describe the experience in phases. They call the first phase shock and numbness, the second phase yearning and searching, the third phase despair and disorganization, and then the fourth phase reorganization and recovery. So it gives just kind of a broad-based way to think about where am I? Like, and if you're in one of these phases, to tell yourself that's okay and that's normal. And then I think I have a graph on the right, is what they find that difficulty in bereavement most often will come from your attachment style. So this would be something you need to look up on your own, whatever, what attachment style am I? But there's kind of three main, that people are either a secure attachment style, anxious attachment style, or avoidant attachment style. And so depending on where you fall personally, then when you add in bereavement, you may have different experiences. So if you are an avoidant and anxious attachment style, bereavement may be fearful for you and feel very disorganizing. If you are just an anxiously attached person, you may feel very preoccupied by your bereavement. If you're an avoidant attachment person, you may dismiss your bereavement experience. You may run from it and get out. And then if you are a more securely attached person, bereavement may be more autonomous for you, meaning that you can be comfortable with closeness, you can seek support, and you're able to kind of move through. And so that just gives another parameter of like identifying, where am I? And then when you identify those different parameters, then there are different ways to do help seeking that may be more applicable.
This is
Ooh, and
this is super interesting. Oh, go ahead, David.
yeah, oh, I'm just thinking like, okay, now this brings in an extra dynamic that helps explain why it might be different for me than for somebody else, right? What is my style, my personality, and it can explain how grief can be different based on that. Where the other two we've looked at are kind of
Across the
not
board.
like across the board, right? And so I kind of like that. I could figure out where I'm at on this scale, and then my actions might be different. Where on the other ones, the actions might kind of all be the same for everybody. This adds a little bit more personal application to it.
Yeah.
There definitely is a desire to be secure, generally, right? Like, I
Mhm.
wanna be that one. Yeah, yeah.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
if I'm fearful or if I'm anxious, but I wanna be secure, is there any anything within this framework that helps me know how to get there?
Yeah, I mean, so I'd say I map onto more anxious, right? So just that feeling of being abandoned, loneliness as a widowed woman, and then
Mhm.
grief feeling really overwhelming and consuming. So for me, I realized I needed to create other secure attachment experiences to make up for what I wasn't getting with my husband. So that looked like with certain of my family members, developing much closer relationships to where I could talk to them like I would have spoken to a spouse. And then also on the overwhelmingness of the grief, I think for me, it looked like pursuing therapy to help keep me cognitively balanced so that I wasn't just giving in to these huge emotional, overwhelming experiences, but that I could still function. Get out of bed, eat food, do my laundry. And so I think as you map on, then you can just see, because this is where I'm landing, then I'm going to need these kinds of supports.
Oh, that's super helpful. Yeah, I love that. And I think it is important that at the bottom there of that slide where it says our attachment style shapes how we experience and express grief. There's no right or wrong way to grieve. I think that's helpful to remember too, that if I am anxious, if I am fearful, if I am avoidant, that's not the wrong way.
Yeah.
But it kind of helps you see this is where I'm at. This is kind of my style, and then I can be like, okay, what steps do I need to take? Kind of like what you were just saying, to kind of handle it, handle is probably not the best word, but like approach it in a healthier way. Yeah.
So yeah,
Okay.
feel free on any of these, you can just find out more, right? Chat
Yeah.
GPT, get a book, like all of these models, even if it just feels like, gosh, just learning about one that's resonating is a way to go about it. There's YouTube videos galore, people giving kind of explanations. Yeah.
Super
Well,
interesting. Thank you.
I think so far, we've kind of liked them more as we've gone. And
Well, they're
and the
getting more up to
next
speed with us. I'm a girl of the
yes.
Yeah.
80s, right? Like, I'm
Yeah.
like, "Oh, yeah, this makes sense."
Well, and I say that because the next one is the one that when you were explaining it, I was like, bingo. No, that I get it. I can see it and I'm here and I'm there. And it made a lot of sense to me. So let's talk
Yeah.
about this next one.
And this is my strobe and shoot 1999. That's my graduation from high school year, right? And this is the theory that I used in all of my dissertation work. So if I have a favorite, this is going to be it. And they've developed what's called the dual process model, or they call it the DPM of coping with bereavement. It's cut off there. And the way they conceptualize grief is that when we lose someone, we have to do two things. We have to process the loss, but we also have to keep living. And we have to do those things simultaneously. You don't get to say, for a year or for 5 months, I'm going to stop and do this thing and then move into this thing. So they really kind of organize it in a way that's just true to how we live life. And so their idea is that when we're working through bereavement, there's kind of two buckets that we're moving from. The loss-oriented bucket includes doing grief work, the intrusion of grief, breaking the bonds and ties with the person who died, and then experiences of denial or avoiding making changes in your life. And then they have the restoration-oriented bucket, which is associated to attending to life changes, doing new things, distracting yourself from grief, denying and avoiding the grief feelings, and then developing new roles, identity, and relationships. And the idea is that squiggly arrow, yellow arrow in between is that the healthy way through bereavement is to do both, but to move. And so what they call it in the model is oscillation. But it's the idea that you develop an ability to move between loss-oriented grief experiences to more restoration-oriented grief experiences. And what you find, and this model has been well researched, so tons of academic studies giving empirical support saying this is what actually happens to people. What they find is that when you get stuck in one or the other, that's when there are more problems. That's when the grief becomes more persistent or it's not worked through. But the movement is the thing you're looking for. So in therapy, as I work with people, that's something I'm really attuned to. When they come in and talk to me, are they talking just in the loss-oriented vein? Is that it? Is that all their life consists of? Is that all they can feel, see, think, believe? Then I know the problem is we've got to have movement to restoration, or vice versa. Are they only on, oh, well, I bought a new house, I've married a new husband, I've done, are they just moving on, that you're like, do you remember that your loved one died? Can you say their name? And so you're really looking at that as a clinician on, are they moving? Can they move? And where can we create some space to move between the two sides?
One of the things that's interesting that I'm noticing about this is in both categories, in the loss oriented side and the restoration oriented side, there's things that I don't think we're supposed to use the words good or bad, but there's things that I would in my layman's term use good or bad. Like, okay, grief work on the loss oriented side feels really good. The intrusion of grief doesn't feel great, but it's part of the reality of where you're at. And the
Yeah.
same with the restoration. If I'm denying my grief, well, that can't be wonderful. But if I'm doing new things, that does feel good, as long as, to your point, I'm not just stuck only doing new things, but I'm oscillating back and forth. But it feels like it addresses both side of things, feelings we might feel uncomfortable with or not want to have, but also these things that we're trying to do on both sides. And so this one really resonated with me, along with the idea of being stuck and giving me something that can help me get unstuck if I'm feeling that way.
Yeah. And even just simplistically, if you look on there and you're like, wow, I'm like check on all the restoration oriented, then it gives you a map of like, oh, I guess I can, do something here on this side, or vice versa. I love the permission to be distracted from grief. Who doesn't want that? Like, go to a movie and forget about it. Like there's permission for that in the grief experience.
Yep. That's awesome.
And I love that too of, it's permission to bounce back and forth too. Like that, I guess that's where my mind's going. It's like, it's okay to do some of this and do some of that and be both. I remember sitting with a counselor after our daughter died and going through all like the feelings, that we have felt in the last, 30 days or whenever it was. And just dropping the whole deck of cards and all the feelings just on like all of them, just all of them and all of them at the same time, and he's like, yeah, that's okay. Right. Like it's okay to have felt all of that. Let's honor that, and it just changed my mind of like, yeah, it's okay to have both. It's okay to bounce back and forth. It's okay to go forward a few steps and then step backward a few steps as well. And I feel like, yeah, I feel that here.
Yeah. And I hope that it just helps to normalize. Again, we have this experience. We think we have to have this experience in this way, especially if we need to be faith-filled and full of hope. But it's like normalizes that this is the experience for people who grieve broadly.
Okay, let's move into the 2000s.
Yeah. Okay, so this one is so interesting. And the main point on this is my least research, sorry, but his name's George Bonanno. But his main idea that I thought this is so helpful is that one of the main outcomes of grief is resilience. People overcome it and people work through it. And that's what happens. And so I thought that's just so helpful, because I think sometimes there's such a feeling that like, I have to have all these things happen and I have to go through this and I have to have this suffering. But in his research, he really found that the most common response to loss is resilience. Therefore, many people over time adapt pretty well and don't have incredible long-term distress.
I think this is our podcast, right?
Mhm.
Like this is the whole point behind our podcast is we interview people. Nobody ever says they've arrived to that
Yeah.
perfect place, but Kori and I want people to share their stories in a faithful way so that somebody who's just recently lost a loved one can say, one day I can feel like that person, or one day I can talk about my loss like that person. I can't do it today. I'm not ready to do that today, but one day I will be able to do that. And we've talked
Mhm.
to people who have been 2 months after, Jen Suter had lost her husband and her son 20 days apart, and two months before and 3 months before. And one of our recent episodes that just came out, it had been 30 years
Mhm.
since Sandy Smith had lost her daughter Stephanie. And so, but this idea is that there's hope in that future day where I can feel resilient, and I might not feel it today, but I can get there
Yeah.
if I just keep chugging along.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is the norm.
Yeah, and it's been the norm since the beginning, right? Like if people hadn't been resilient, this whole human experiment wouldn't have lasted very long,
Yeah.
right? Because everyone is going to experience that, and billions of people have experienced grief, and but there is hope, and we can move forward, and that doesn't minimize, right, what we're going through or what we're experiencing,
Mhm.
as much as it gives us hope that we can do this. That's
Yeah.
cool.
So is there anything
Yeah,
with
so
chronic grief?
the
Yeah.
idea is that he talks about there are different trajectories. Resilience is the norm. Most people will go that way, but some will take a more chronic grief trajectory or a recovery/adjustment trajectory. And so recognizing that just there are different paths. And I think the thing about Bonanno's research is he's so tailored to the individuality of the experience and the heterogeneity, meaning this is not universal. And we cannot speak of it that way, and we cannot attend to it that way because the people experiencing it are all unique.
Okay. Jordan, I hope this is our most listened to podcast episode ever. This is just such good. I don't know. It just feels like I'm understanding myself and my experience
Mhm.
more and more in the 42 minutes that we've been visiting, right?
Yeah, I can't wait to go back and listen and take some more notes. Like, that's what I'm feeling like. I'm learning some things here. So thank you, Jordan.
Yeah, well, thank you for letting me nerd out on this stuff that I love and have been trying to figure out. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Well,
awesome.
we've got a couple more to talk about.
Yeah.
Let's see what's next.
Yeah, so Klaas, Silverman, and Nickman in kind of 1996 developed what's called the continuing bonds theory. And this is a real reaction to Freudian grief theory, which is like from the 1800s. So Freud identified grief. He wrote a wonderful book called Mourning and Melancholia in 1917. And he identified that mourning is natural, it's painful, but one of his ideas was that successful mourning requires letting go. And I think that really got picked up in contemporary theory. And so the idea was like, to successfully get over your grief, you have to be able to just let go of this person. And that has been wonderfully contested through research by this team specifically, in that actually all you have to do is renegotiate the type of connection you have. But letting go is not feasible, is not desirable, is not helpful. But we're just renewing or renegotiating the bond that we have with the person who died. And so the theory is called continuing bonds theory. And it involves creating an ongoing connection, but in different ways. Rather than with a live person, you're now connecting through memory, through meaning, and through identity. And so it's a really lovely adaptation to kind of what we know from living in grief. You're not going to forget these people. They were your spouse or your child or your parent. They are intrinsically a part of you. And so the healthy way forward is not detachment, but it's integrating who they are and how they affected you into your life. And so I think it's just a beautiful thing. And I think it has gospel connotations that make spiritual sense to us too.
The other thing I hear people say a lot is, I still have a relationship with them. It's just different.
Mm.
You're right. And that's, to me, this is kind of explaining what some of those differences might be, or how we might successfully maintain that relationship, even though it looks different than it did before.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of like history, and this is a weird way to think about it or ask this, but I'm just thinking about the traditional model of being the goal is detachment, closure. And I'm thinking of people in church history that I know. I know Joseph's mom, Lucy Smith. I think I counted it once, and it was like 30 funerals that she, would have attended of people who came after her,
Mm.
including Joseph and Hiram, but like including grandchildren. It was just a lot, and that was just kind of more common then. That it was a lot of people that you knew, or that that were your progenitors, would pass away. I know another one is Oliver Cowdery, who kind of gets like a hard. I think we look at him harshly at times when we look back that he left the church. But I found out once that he had 6 children and only one of them lived to adulthood, and I thought, wow, like that's a lot that's heavy, for him to. And so I'm wondering if some of that traditional model, and I don't know that there's a good answer for this, but if some of that traditional model was because there was so much, it was a lot, and they had to detach a little bit more when life expectancy was 20 years, or around there. And when they're having to bury children along the plains as they, move on from where they're at. Anyways, I don't know if you have any thoughts or ideas on that, but just that's where my mind's going as a church history tour guide, I guess.
Oh, that makes a ton of sense, and there's a lot of just practicality to that, right? You have to get your crops in. You can't spend a week laying on your bed mourning this
Yeah.
person who died, So I think, yeah, we've made death less common, so much less common. We have so much more control. People who would have died 100 years ago don't, because those diseases are eradicated. So yeah, I think then that has opened up that our mourning is more significant because we don't do it as often, as much. And so, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Hmm. Okay, well, let's move on to our last one.
Yes. So this is Robert Niemeyer, I think is how you say his name. And it's 2018. And his idea is that the process through grieving for the bereaved person is that it's not just about the emotional experience, working through the feelings, or even the tasks, doing the things. His idea gets to really like an existential thought, in that the way through is to make meaning. What will this person's death, what will your shattered life after the fact mean to you? And can you create that meaning? And so the idea is that you experience the loss, which leads to questioning and exploring, which opens up a door to rebuild meaning. And in the questioning and exploring, he identifies kind of 3 phases: that you examine beliefs, that you seek answers, and that you find new purpose. And I think for me, this really maps on, because this is what I did, right? Like, I lost my husband in 2016, and I had a couple years of just being in the nuclear fallout. And then my way out was to make it mean something. And for me, that meaning has come from using what I've learned and what I've experienced to help other people. And the amazing thing is that finding that meaning has given it a value that I feel in some ways, and at sometimes, that I wouldn't trade. I wouldn't give up. And so I think I really love his aspect of And again, so this is like a sequential steps, meaning reconstruction isn't something you're doing the week after the person died, but it's more of when you get years down the road, can this be a facet that you involve into your grieving experience that recreates you and that puts you on a path and a trajectory that may not have happened otherwise?
Yeah, I feel like I resonate with this one a ton. And I've said this, I think, even on this podcast, that when my daughter passed away, I asked questions I'd never asked before in my life. And that led me to wanting to find answers, wanting to see and examining beliefs, seeking those answers, and finding a new purpose. And kind of like David was talking about earlier, that kind of explains what this podcast has become. It came from that, I think, my process of working through that model a little bit, and then I love that idea of the rebuilt meaning and what that rebuilt meaning means to us. Like that's powerful when we can see it that way.
I also am having a hard time finding really any conflict with the gospel in any of these teacher rights. Kind of maybe back to one of those original points, like this could actually facilitate our spiritual experience. Like talk about finding new purpose, reconnecting with our Savior, becoming a new creature in Christ, seeking answers. Where do we go to seek the answers that we're searching for? Examining our belief. These are all things that we can do within a gospel context, along with many of the other things that we've talked about. Or you can find examples in the scriptures of somebody going through these various things, or in church history, to Kori's dear heart. And so I don't find any conflict between that idea.
Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of truth, whether that's secular truth, religious truth, like it is a whole. And so it is, becomes part of one whole thing. And so whichever way we find it and can embrace it, it will help us because it is true and we can rely on it.
I'm wondering if I can change our last question a little bit. I was trying to think how we might incorporate our question that we love to ask everyone, and I know we didn't talk about this before, so no high expectations here of any kind. Well, maybe a little, but I want to ask, our question is generally, considering your experience with grief, but I wonder if I could ask it, considering your experience studying these frameworks of grief, what do you now believe about Jesus Christ?
I think I'd say that he wants us to move through it and that he's provided the resources for it, and that it's the actual working through it that will change us to become like him.
Yeah, I love that. And I love thinking of the Savior as a healer. And these frameworks help us find healing and help us to be connected to him. And it's through our grief that we come to know him. Many of us have come to know him. And one of the ways that we've come to know him in the most deep parts of our spirits and our bodies and our minds, And so this has been super helpful. Jordan, thank you so much for being willing to share what you've learned and what you've lived and what you've shared with so many other people. And we're looking forward to many other episodes that will help cover different concepts, but in this similar idea of helping us find some ways to grieve in a way that will connect us to our Savior, Jesus Christ.
Thank you both. I think if that can be the end goal, that's why we're here on earth, is to become like him. And if grief is your way in, then God bless you and God will see you through it. I know that's true.
Thank you to our incredible guests for sharing their story of hope. If you know someone who might be blessed by hearing this message, please share it with them. We would love it if you would subscribe, rate, and review, and comment on our podcast so others can find it. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook, as well as join our Grief and Beliefs Facebook group. Thank you to our sponsor, High Five Live Tours, where fun and joy meet on inspiring travel experiences. Special thanks to our producer, Misty Lynn Howard. Check out her history podcast called Faith Ignited. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you next time.